Interesting on the security point. I think it's one of the headaches the companies think about. First of all, who has access to all the data? Who are the sysadmins who have access to all this data? Can it be hacked? I mean, Tino, is that one of the things? I mean, if a company is worried about security with big data, what would you say to them?
That's a really interesting point. When you think about security, when you think about all the recent hacks that have occurred, I will say a lot of those hacks have occurred because a company has made a decision to own the security story. I think it makes a lot of sense to partner with companies who can leverage economies of scale to provide a security story, who are vested in providing security for hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of customers. And which is why you see a lot of public cloud providers. Folks are starting to kind of realize that public cloud is not as secure as private cloud is not necessarily true. And as Mike was saying, that's kind of what we're facing, right? With big data and with public cloud merging together, the security story emerges.
Mm-hmm. Something your take on security, sort of the nightmare of security and big data. Like, how do you? There's some IT executive out there who's extremely anxious about the idea of when the idea of security gets mixed with the idea of big data, that makes them really nervous. I mean, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really tough. I mean, if you look at the Ashley Madison scandal that just happened, right? That's the most recent one. It's really scary. I mean, on one hand, I think that all of us have little sympathy for people who are, potentially philanderers and looking for people to cheat with on the web. And on the flip, there's probably a whole bunch of people who are on that website who really are maybe have done nothing and possibly are getting accused based on intention. And it's mining this intention data that's really interesting, because now we're able to, through all of this data, get inside people's brains and get inside of their heads. And I think that puts a huge responsibility on the people who are consuming this data about how to use it, who's using it. And I don't think these are just technical problems, right? It's not just about securing the data itself. It's about being able to make sure that the appropriate people inside the institution are able to see what the rules are around how to use it, around what could be done with this data, being able to warn people and empower people with the appropriate knowledge.
It's sort of privacy issues, almost like a big brother issue with big data?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there is a huge set of responsibilities that come up socially around training people to learn how to use the data and when to use the data and where to use the data better. And I don't know that that's just about sort of locking down and assigning roles and rights and privileges. I think there are technical solutions, but I think the more difficult solutions that if you're a CIO you have to face are, what do I do about these insiders who have access to the data who may be a threat? What happens if somebody figures out an innovative use, as Target did, around predicting whether or not somebody's going to have a baby, and do we send them a mailer? And how do we think about these problems internally, and how do we make sure that those don't threaten our business? And I think those are really the ones that are much more profound, and I think the ones that are much more difficult to contend with. And I think we see that all the time with our customers, because a lot of what we do is help customers broaden the use of data inside of their enterprises. And the biggest question becomes, well, if we're going to broaden the use of all this information, how do we make sure that we're doing it in a responsible way? And how do we empower people with knowledge that maybe they should only have contextually or only have in a certain particular way? And so the security challenges, I think, don't go away by any extent. I think they just get worse and worse over time, because as you give people more knowledge, you give them more ability to do harm.
Right. I mean, the Target issue you bring up, where apparently based on shopping patterns, Target in theory knows whether the family member may or may not be pregnant. Obviously, it does create an enormously sensitive issue. I mean, does Target or some retailer then begin sending mailers to the house? I mean, what is, or sort of like, there's the big data solution, and there's some very, very human issues about how that solution gets used.
Yeah.
Mr. Matcher, what's your take on security and big data? Is there any way to lessen the headache there?
Yeah, well, so just to follow up on that, so I saw that there was, the conversation descending in 3 levels, and security at one level being about making sure you've got the data under lock and key, and that could include adhering to laws, like making sure you don't repatriate some data that's supposed to stay in one country versus another country. At a second level, you've got regulation and compliance issues, which is, again, still sort of laws enforced, but to say, I won't, even though I'm allowed to have credit cards as a company, I won't store them or use them in certain ways, and I have to protect those from being accessed by certain members of my organization that might not use them in the right way or prevent them from leaking. And then you've got what Satyan brought up, which is intent, which is minority report kind of stuff. Like I can mash up all this data, and now maybe I'm getting to the point where I'm not just finding out what someone's already done, but what they might intend to do, and should I leverage that or not? And and I think the rule has to be more than simply will I be embarrassed if I do it this way, which seems to be what most people are talking about now. I find out someone's pregnant and I target them with what Target did actually, right? So it was then that very directed advertising, which got everyone into an uproar. And what they decided to do instead is now bury that inside other advertising and blend it in so it's not noticeable, not objectionable. But
that's a tricky solution to the problem.
But they're still using that data that way. They never said they were going to stop doing that. In fact, they still exploit that intention. They just do it in a way that's not straight line A to B. So I think the moral issue goes deeper. It's like, should they be doing that? Should we be allowing them that? And is privacy information on that? But we certainly can't solve that today. I would say that there's a lot of value to be mined out of big data that doesn't go into those gray areas that can be about company performance or operational improvement or predictive scoring on which action should the company take themselves to be more optimal in their business processes. And for a lot of companies, they're probably safer in those areas than they are in dealing with client and external third-party information. I think that's a real sensitive area that has yet to be worked out.